Today's video is going to continue finishing the smoothing process and then show you how to create the alterations. The alterations are things that can be done to your pinch pot to make them unique and creative and more special to you. So right now we have our basic forms. In the last video, I showed you how to do a lot of trimming and smoothing and evening up, but my clay was a little too soft to finish the edges. So I'm going to set these two aside for right now, and I'm going to work on my shallow pot. I'm still not real happy with how round it is, so I'm going to flip it upside down, and I'm going to do a little bit of trimming. Now the clay has been sitting for a little bit now, and it's become what's considered leather hard. This means it's a lot easier to work with, but doing some of that preliminary smoothing is also helpful. So if I have any soft scraps, I want to continue to keep those scraps so that you can use them. Now, if they're getting a little bit dry, you can just add a wet paper towel, and that will make those scraps kind of rehydrate, because you are going to need a little bit of extra clay for the alterations. Now, if you don't have a lot of extra clay at home, that's not a big deal. If you're in the studio, I can always get you more clay. So we'll kind of make it work. And if you're at home and you're like, geez, I just don't have enough clay at all, you can always make an arrangement with me to come back in and get a little bit more. But usually the scraps you trim off should be okay. So now I feel a little bit better with how round my pinch pot is. And I'm actually going to hold it this time and take the fettling knife and just real gently trim the top edge. This is going to get rid of my other cut marks. And since the clay is leather hard, it's really not sticking this time. When I cut, I can just kind of take off little shavings. So I feel a lot better with how the edge looks, and so I'm ready to smooth it with that sponge. So I brought with me today a bowl for water. If you're at home, if you have something that you can use to put water in, or you can do this at the sink. So I'm just going to keep rounding and then rotating. And the goal is to make it look like I didn't just cut that area. We don't want that crisp edge. Glaze doesn't like really sharp, crisp edges, and it will cause it to be glossy, but your color isn't going to show up if it's too crisp. And so I'm rubbing it round. So hopefully you can see that this is more rounded. And then if I go this way, you can see that it's crisp and it's kind of sharp. So I'm getting it round, still crisp and kind of sharp. And so I want to just continue to move around. Okay. This takes a few minutes. You might need to squeeze your sponge out, get a little bit more water into it, and rub. Now, if your clay is too soft, you're going to deform it. That's just what's going to happen because I'm adding a little moisture. And so now I can set that one aside. So with my deep pinch pot, I just want to trim a little bit more off my top again. One side's not quite as even as the rest. And since the clay is drier today in that leather hard state, it's easier for me now, instead of holding it in my hand, that I can just kind of rotate it around the table. So then I'm going to take that sponge and I want to round this lip too. So it's not just like wiping the water on it. I want to round that edge out. So hopefully you can see that this is starting to round, or this is a crisp edge where I cut it. And so you're just going to work back and forth with your sponge. Now make sure your sponge isn't too wet. The more water you add to your pinch pot, it might not be able to withstand that. And so then you might really mush the pot or add too much water and make it difficult. So now I have that top edge rounded, and I'm going to set that one aside. So then my semicircular is my last pot, and I want to round that top edge as well, so using the sponge. Now last time when I was working on doing some smoothing, I had some clay crumblies that were still sticking because my clay was in the wet condition. And so if you need to, you can go back with the fettling knife or any of your wood tools and finish smoothing your outside surface. I recommend trying to do as much smoothing before you add your altered parts to them, because it's just easier. Because right now I don't have anything attached to this, so I'm not risking breaking anything. Okay, so that's just kind of finishing off my smoothing process. Now, once my alterations are added, I will have a final smoothing. So even if they're not perfect or you're not 100% finished, you'll be able to smooth a little bit more. Okay, so for the alterations, you're going to add a foot to one of your pots. And a foot is anything attached to the bottom. That's going to raise it up off the table. And so if you look at any of your maybe ceramic dishes or bowls at home, you'll notice that it has a little edge, and that's the foot. One of them you're going to add texture to. And then the last one, you're going to attach parts to turn it into something different. So for instance, maybe I'm going to take one of my pinch pots and I'm going to add maybe a handle and make a cup. So I want you to really change it, and if you want to turn it on its side, you want to flip it upside down, you want to do something unique and different to it, that's fine, as long as it has attached parts and it's not just a pot anymore. Now with these alterations, I don't mind which pinch pot you do what to. And I'm going to just show you some very, very simple examples. So I have some extra clay, and again, if you don't have enough scraps to reuse, or you don't have enough clay at home to create your alterations, contact me and we can see if we can do a clay pickup. So I'm just going to take this small hunk of clay from a wedged chunk. So I had a chunk that I already wedged up, and I'm just going to take this hunk and I'm going to roll it on the table, and I'm going to make a coil. So if you remember from the scoring and slipping video you watched, I just made a coil on the table. And that's what I'm doing here. So I'm going to add this to my deep pinch pot. Now, I'm not telling you which one to add what alteration to. That's up to you. And I have a lot more coil than I need, so I'm going to pinch that off. And then I need to attach it. So anytime you attach parts, you need to score. Scoring is roughing up that surface. I'm using my needle tool to do this, so that I can rough that area up. So I only want to rough where it's going, and then I want to take the piece I'm attaching and rough that up as well. You need to do both sides. You have to score both sides. So you can see that that's nice and rough as well. And then I'm going to use one of my paint brushes to dip into my slip, and I'm going to brush some on. Now, if your slip has dried a little bit, your little cup of wet mushy clay, you can add some water to it, which is what I've done with mine, which is why it's kind of watery. And then I like to use the brush. You can simply use your finger as well. And then you want to make sure that you press that down. Okay. So I could leave it, make sure it sits flat and even. I could leave it so that you could tell that there's an added part, or I can blend it in. I'm going to choose to blend it in. The reason why is because I like that look, and I'm going to feel that my piece is more secure. So if you don't decide to blend your foot in, you can definitely use your finger and just kind of blend around that area. But I'm using that rounded wood tool that kind of has a back on it, or a rounded back, and I'm going to blend all the way around. And then I'm going to use my finger to kind of help clean that up a little bit. I also want to blend on the inside. Now your foot does not have to be a coil. This is an example. Maybe you're going to add little balls of clay to the bottom of your pinch pot. Maybe you're going to make a flat piece of clay and add that on. It really doesn't matter to me what kind of bottom you put on, as long as you put it onto the bottom, raises it up off the table. You could also have chosen to do it to your semicircular or to your shallow pot. I just chose the deep pot. So technically one of my alterations is finished. I want to make sure then that I put my initials on the bottom. This way when your pots are dry and they come back to school for firing, we can figure out what pieces belong to you If you don't want to put your initials and you put your first name, that's fine. If you want to use a marking of some sort to help you identify it, that's fine as well. So I'm just going to set that one aside. So the next one needs to have texture. And again, I don't care which one that you use, but you want to make sure that you add texture to one of them. So you have this wood tool that has these little edges. That would be one way for you to create texture. You could also carve into the surface. And so I'm just going to turn and grab my tool. So this is that Sgraffito tool, and it has that hooked end. So I'm just going to draw into the surface, and it's going to pull away some of the clay. I would probably think out your drawing a little bit more than I just did right now. And then I'm going to come and maybe draw another line into it. You could write your name, you could draw shapes, you could draw an object. Really, you could do whatever you wanted as long as you are creating texture in that surface. So maybe I want to take my tool and make textured lines inside. When your clay dries, you'll be able to remove some of these crumbs. But when your clay is leather hard, they might stay. And so you don't have to worry about them too much, but they might bother some of you. And so just remember that when they dry, you can kind of brush them away. So then I'm going to move all the way around. So technically, I've added texture to this pot. Maybe I want to come in with that wood tool and I want to add texture on the edges. Maybe I want my texture to be on the outside. Maybe at home you have an old pen that you can take the cap and press circles into it. Maybe at home you have something that you can stamp inside. So really, whatever you can do to create textures is just fine. So now I have this textured edge. I drew a design in the inside, and then maybe I'm going to come back in with one more circle. And I'll be real honest, I really didn't think this design out. So I would recommend that you do that. And then in the circle, maybe I'm going to repeat my lines so it kind of matches the outer edge. But have some fun with it. I know you're limited on the texture tools that you have in your kits, so you just need to kind of experiment the best that you can. Now, if I wanted to do something extra, I could add a foot to the bottom of this, and maybe just for example, I'm going to take clay, I'm going to roll 3 little balls of clay. Okay, so there's my 3 little balls of clay, and then I'm going to score where they're going to go, and I'm going to score them. Remember that scoring is roughing up that surface. That's going to help your pieces stay together. And then I'm just going to use my brush again and dab a little bit of the slip onto the parts I'm attaching and where I'm attaching, and then I'm going to press them on. So these guys are going to be a little trickier to blend to the surface, but if I don't do any blending, I almost guarantee that they'll fall off. So I'm going to try the best that I can with my needle tool to kind of blend around, or I can use my brush and try to blend around the best that I can so that those don't fall off. So you really need to score deep and press them together, and then another way I can press is then to make sure that they're flat. So that's just another example of a foot. All you have to have is a foot on one texture, and you can do them however you want. It doesn't have to be the pinch pot that's deep or the shallow one how I did. You can pick different ones. And then your last pinch pot, I want you to turn it into something else. So if I wanted to, I could flip it upside down. I could cut parts off of it, but I'm going to turn mine on the side and kind of squish it down a little bit so that it sits flat. Okay, and then I'm going to take some clay and I'm going to roll a ball of clay. I'm going to roll another ball of clay, and then I'm going to use my needle tool and I'm going to score So I want you to come up with your own ideas. I mean, if you take some of mine and make them your own, that's fine. But I really don't want you to go on to Pinterest, let's say, and copy the pinch pots that you see there. They can act as good inspiration, but I don't want us to copy other people's work. So how can you make a change to it so that it becomes your own? So basically what I'm doing now is pressing on these little itty bitty eyeballs. Okay, I'm going to take another hunk of clay and I'm going to attempt to sculpt a nose. And my nose is going to be kind of funky, so it's not going to be like a true nose. So I want to see how that fits. This is going to fit down like that. So I want to make sure that I score. And then I'm going to score the side here. Put my slip on. And then I really need to press that. So I'm supporting and pressing at the same time. And then since it's hard to get my wood tools, I'm going to try to do some blending with my brush. So technically, I've made like a little face here. And then I could come in and I could decorate the eyeballs. Maybe I could add a tongue or some teeth. But this is just what I mean by adding parts to it. So I turned it into something else. It's no longer necessarily the semicircular pinch pot. Now it's this little face. So with our alterations, one is going to have a foot, something that goes on the bottom of the pinch pot that raises it up off the table. One of them is going to have textures and or carvings, as you saw me carve those lines. And then one needs to have attached parts to change it into something else. So my semicircular changed into something else, my attached parts. My deep pinch pot has a foot. Then my shallow pinch pot has carving and textures inside. And for fun, I just added another example of a foot to the bottom. Now with my deep pot, if I wanted to go with this, and let's say I wanted to write my name on it as something extra, I can do that. So I don't want to stop you from doing more, but I definitely want to make sure that you get at least those minimum specifications done. So carve my name into it. And then once it dries a little bit more, I can kind of brush away those clay crumblies. Or if you can get your wood tool, like I have a wood tool here that has a point, I can kind of come in maybe and make it smoother. Now, if I make a mistake, let's say, oh my gosh, I hate how my writing looks, I want to get rid of that. I'm going to use my wood tool and rub it out. I can also use my metal rib, and it's kind of like I just erased what I drew on there. So as I was saying, I'm not real happy with my design because I didn't think it through. So if I wanted to, I could come in with my tool. The rib works great, wood tools work great, and I can kind of like erase what I did and try it again. Now, if you don't finish doing all of these alterations in one sitting, that's okay. It usually takes a couple sittings to do that. So you just want to make sure that you cover your clay in between when you're working with it. Now, your clay should be what's considered leather hard. And so at this state, it can really withstand having parts attached. You can still work with it, but you're not going to be able to just squish it and roll it back up. So if you make a mistake or you really dislike one of your pinch pots, you can squish it, add water to it, and start over. So now I feel a little bit better. I just kind of made like a rim and then like a middle area that's designed, and then this area is plain now. So I changed my design. I was able to make it a little bit better in my head. Okay? So those are some suggestions on how you can make alterations for pinch pots and what you might do to do that. But I really want you to have fun. I want you to be creative. I want you to think about how the pinch pots look to you and what maybe you could make them into. And again, you can look at other resources for inspiration, but I definitely don't want you to copy something that you've seen. So if you see something on Pinterest that you like, or you go to Google and type in pinch pots, just remember that you are trying to make something different. Okay, so have fun with this. And then we will have one more part to pinch pots, which will just be finishing them off. So if you need more clay, contact me. That way I can assist you in getting you clay, whether it's picking it up at school, or if you don't live too far from me, I can do a drop off. But let me know, and then that way you have enough for your alteration.